Migrants moved out of holding pen under El Paso Bridge. Federal immigration officials appear to have cleared out an enclosure under a bridge in El Paso where they were detaining hundreds of families of asylum seekers, following an outcry over the conditions at the site. But authorities appeared to have shifted some processing of migrants to another site on the other side of the bridge, using a military-style tent near an existing processing facility operated by Customs and Border Protection. A smaller number separately, a spokesman for Customs and Border Protection said on Sunday that the agency was in the process of transferring all of the illegal aliens being held temporarily at the original enclosure under the bridge to a processing station in northeast El Paso. The spokesman said, the border agency contended last week that it had no choice but to hold the migrants in the outdoor location, surrounded by fencing and razor wire, because of overcrowding at processing facilities in El Paso, brought on by a surge in Central American migrants applying for asylum. Kevin McAleenan, the Commissioner of Customs and Border Protection, addressed journalists last Wednesday near the enclosure when he claimed that the country's immigration enforcement system was at a breaking point. Criticism over the bridge had been building all week, with reports of children sleeping on trash-strewn gravel at the site under the Paso del Norte Bridge. Some migrant razor wire and shredded mylar blankets, all that remains of the Border Patrol holding pen under the Paso del Norte Bridge, where some migrants seeking asylum were kept for as long as 4 days. They slept on bare. The American Civil Liberties Union said on Sunday that the detention of migrants in outdoor pens was an unprecedented and extreme violation. Citing interviews with families held under the bridge, the ACLU said it had received reports that agents had verbally and physically harmed migrants, forced them to stand for prolonged periods and deprived them of sleep and access to medical care, and had failed to provide the migrants with adequate food and water. Some families were detained under the bridge for as long as 4 days, the ACLU said, adding that families with infant children were told to sleep on the ground and were not provided with any bedding, mats or chairs. Migrants have since been transferred to undisclosed locations, he said, adding that the agency has not told us or members of Congress where migrants are now being held and under what conditions. Local political leaders and human rights groups said that a sharp increase in asylum seekers should have been foreseeable, as part of an annual surge in border crossings before the arrival of the immigration officials were already scrambling to respond to a shifting profile of migrants arriving at the border with Mexico. Border Patrol federal immigration officials claim that legal rulings have created loopholes that make it more attractive for Central Americans to apply for asylum in the United States. This status quo is not an option, Andrew Meehan, Assistant Commissioner for Public Affairs at Customs and Border Protection, said in a statement on Saturday. The legal framework, advocates for immigrants said the federal government was obligated by law to humanely process asylum requests, and could have avoided the need for migrant families to spend days on end in the holding pen. If they wanted to prepare for this, they could have done so, said Fernando Garcia, Director of the Border Network for Human Rights, an organization in El Paso. The immigration authorities in El Paso have asserted that detention facilities were overwhelmed in the city, as in other places along the border. Mr. McAleenan, the ACLU questioned why the Border Patrol was resorting to holding migrants under the bridge when its budget had grown to $16.7 billion in 2019 from $7.1 billion in 2006. The Border Patrol, Robert Moore and Miriam Jordan contributed reporting.
Raindrop, drop top, top smoking, no cooking the hot pot. Fucking on your bitch, yeah, that. Looking up, open the park pot.